Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Key Steps. Thanks for those who have known this format for joining us again. And this is, as you know, brought to you by the Advanced Workplace Institute. These are short 10-minute discussions that allow the audience to participate via chat. So you'll see a chat feature if you're watching this on YouTube or on LinkedIn. Our guest today is Colombine Gardair. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Who is the Director of Innovation at Advanced Workplace Associates. Let me bring her up. Hi, Colombine. Thanks for joining
Hi.
us.
Hi, Pat.
And
Hi, Partha. Thanks for having me.
it's a pleasure. It's always a pleasure talking to you, Colombine. And for the audience who've just joined in, so as we speak, I'll be speaking with Colombine for about 10 minutes. If you have any questions or any comments, please type them in the chat box that you see in front of you, and you'll actually get to see your comments on the screen. It's almost like watching television. So the way you see Columbine's name there, so we'll put up your comments there, and she'll respond to you live. Uh, so Colombine, the pandemic, as we remember the last 2 years, kind of demonstrated a direct link between wellness and human performance at the workplace. And for, I think, a lot of us, like people like us who do workplace strategy, interior designers and CRE professionals, and even I think HR professionals in companies, the focus is, I think, fast shifting from designing work and workplaces for efficiency to designing with a wellness focus. And this shift involves some, I guess, some new priorities and new ways of doing things. And you've been at the forefront of innovating a lot of these things. And to drive straight in, Colombine, what would you say are some of the key steps in designing for wellness and human performance?
I think for me there are three steps really. The first one is to understand, and by that I mean understanding what do we mean by wellness, and how does that link to the workplace nowadays. And I think there are three components that are linked to work in terms of wellness. There is the kind of individual components, the things we can do to ourselves for our own individual brain and physical power. I mean, the two being in any case really linked here. Nutrition, hydration, exercise, all these kind of things which are basically aiming at making the individual bodies and individual brains better. There is a social component because we shouldn't ignore the fact that we are social beings. We don't thrive in our own little silos. We thrive with others, and there are some aspects of that of that social wellness, like building trust and social cohesion and having effective communications with others, are really, really important to our well-being, but also to our productivity as teams. And things like then there is the environment that we're in, and if we're talking about work, then there is the organization that we evolve in, and there is aspects of well-being and that are associated to that. How much choice do you have about how you do your work? How much interruption do you get? How do you balance all of the inside and outside and the previous elements together in that sweet spot, basically. So that's the first thing. It's understand what is well-being and what are the elements that you want to emphasize in your workplace. Then there is an element of education. I think the second step is to educate, because people are tired of being told, you have to do this, you have to do that. What's a lot more efficient is to actually, for each individual, to understand why are those elements important, and so that they can make choice about, well, maybe some aspects are more important to me because of who I am than others. Some aspect, maybe I'm very social and that social part are really important to me, or maybe I have health issues and therefore maybe there are some individual part that are really important to me. And the third thing that we should be doing more of in the work and the workplace is empower people by giving them giving them the right settings and the right education, empower them to make their own choices, rather than telling them this is what to do. So in summary, understand, educate, and empower people to make the right choice in the workplace for their own physical and social well-being.
Yeah, one of the things you mentioned is that, yes, I think people are really tired of, hearing or getting an overdose of advisory on how to actually take care of their wellness. And I think that's a problem, because I speak with a lot of people and employees there, and they say that, we're getting an overdose of irrelevant communication, and I'm tired of all that. And employees are smart. They are not stupid that they have to be told to do things, and that's how they perceive that sometimes. And I sense that, we probably need to enable environments, or perhaps a culture where the characteristics of the culture itself encourages people to behave in a certain way and take care of their environment, instead of constant emails and advisory going out. So do you think some kind of a strategy is required to do that, or do you think this kind of happens on its own?
I think you definitely need to strategize about it, and you need to design with an intent. And
Mm,
I'm going to give you an example of a, a kind of that workplace, an example that I've seen in the workplace of how they've actually, rather than tell people what to do, they've really empowered them through design and offering
yeah,
choices. It's the example of a client I've worked with where their kitchen, they were really keen on helping people make better choice of healthy food and healthy drinks, but without suppressing the fact that, without suppressing choice. And so what they did is that in all their kitchen, they organized things where the most visible elements were the healthiest. And then they had drawers of snacks where at the top you had, the healthier, the lower down you'd go, at the bottom drawers that everybody referred to as the Friday drawer. That's where you had the kind of really sweet, unhealthy snacks. But actually, they might not be healthy to your diet and in heavy concentration. But when you need to pick me up at the end of a long week, that boost of sugar and highly concentrated, can be a great asset to your focus and your productivity. So you shouldn't just remove everything. But what they did is that by the way they were presenting things and the education they were doing around them, they empowered people to make their own choices. And I thought that was, one of the best example that I've seen of designing along those principles.
this is so very interesting. It just reminds me of me going shopping with my kids, and when you at the checkout counter, you usually see all those things which you do not want to buy, but you want the kids to buy. They keep it at lower high. This is actually that. I think there's a lot of learning to be had from the retail industry in all of this, where you kind of persuade people by the characteristics of a space or an environment without having to tell them what is to be done. The other thing, before I ask you that question, we like to keep it short. But for the audience, if you have any questions, please do type in your questions, and we'll point it to Colombine. Very interesting, Colombine. The other thing was you mentioned about the need. The first point, in the first point, you mentioned that we need to be aware and we need to be socially cohesive with each other, which is fine. I mean, if we get to meet our colleagues at the workplace regularly, it's fine. But my problem is that, in the work that we do, a lot of people have begun to work remotely now, and they're permanent remote workers. Now, how do you tackle this when you don't see your colleagues for months or years, probably? I mean, it's fine when you meet people socially. It's fine if you do that kind of a design, but how do you do this remotely?
I think you need to do two things. On the one hand, it's promoting opportunities in the remote world, to get to know each other on a non-work level, which we've had to do quite a bit more of during the pandemic because everybody was remote, and we saw backgrounds in people, we saw kids jumping up, we heard dogs barks and all of that, and that created opportunities for getting to know each other as people. So that's one thing. But I think you need to be quite to do it with a bit of an intent initially and make it part of your strategy, because I still hear too many people feel guilty or feel like it's not work, or that they shouldn't be talking with their colleagues when they're on a work call about, the kids and what's happening on their street and the challenges they have, or what makes them happy. There are still too many people out there who feel like when they're doing that with colleagues, they're stealing time away from the company. Whereas it's not true. What they're building is they're building social cohesion and trust with their colleagues. So they're building elements that are key for them to work better as a team. But I think the other thing is the face-to-face aspects should not be neglected. We don't get the same amount of interaction. And just one really simple thing when you're remote that you don't get is direct eye contact, which is a fundamental element of building trust. That, no matter how much you try to give me eye contact through looking directly at your camera, there's not the same responsiveness. It's impossible to have that direct eye contact. And there are plenty of other things we don't get through video. I mean, we are 3D humans with, many different senses, and video only relies on sight and hearing. And there is so much more about us, and things that we're not even aware of, whether it's hormones, whether it's smells, there's all sort of things that gives us huge cues about the person we have in front of us and how we relate to them and how much we can trust them and how much we can be friends with them, all of that. So I think it's also really important to build as part of your, if you have remote teams, to build opportunities just for social, just for those social elements. Just bring them together on a regular basis. Have chats with them about how often they feel is the right thing. And more importantly, have chats about what is the right time. It's okay to say, you know what? We're going to do it at a time that's going to fit everybody. And everybody actually works on a 9 to 5. So why have a social event after hours? People have lives outside of work, and so talk with your teams and agree the pattern, the place, the events, when, where, and how often are we going to have those physical elements, just to kind of solidify those elements of trust and social cohesion that you build remotely, solidifies them on a regular basis through face-to-face events.
Right. I like the the reference to making eye contact. When you do a call like this, I'm struggling between looking at my screen and trying to see if there are any comments, and then looking at the camera and trying to get that contact. I understand that, and many times we do see we get into meetings where some people do not put on their cameras. Well, maybe that's the company culture. It's like walking into a meeting blindfolded, right? But that's the reality you're facing today. But the fact that you say that it's not only eye contact, it's a lot of other things. Maybe there's hormones, maybe sights and smells, the smell of coffee, the pat on the back, all of that put together. I think what you're essentially talking about is the experience of that meeting rather than that place itself. I think it's the experience which actually puts something in my brain that actually resonates, and then, well,
the experience of life in the context of entertainment. There's a whole lot of research that has been done about why a live event is very different from a recording or visioning a recording. Why do people get together in horrible, crappy condition on a football game? Rather, if you ask people where do they prefer to watch a football game, first and foremost, it's in the stadium, even if the view is worse, even if it's raining, even if it's cold. Then comes, if you ask the Brits, then comes the pub, because you still have that social element, and then comes watching it in front of a screen at home, ideally with mates coming over with beer. It's like it's the live event. We are human. We need it, and we need it everywhere, including in our work life.
Right, absolutely. I think I was having an argument with my daughter yesterday, who was a big fan of a famous US, musician, and then so there was an argument about downloads on Spotify versus a live event, and it seems the research actually says that musicians today make much more money out of live events than from music downloads, because it's an experience which you cannot repeat, which you cannot have anywhere else. So I think we'll end with that, Colombine. I think it's experiences. I think designing of experiences which allow people to behave in a certain way, take care of their wellness without them being told what to do, is, I think, what, if I may say, is what you're talking about. Thanks so much, Colombine, for spending time with us. I think we have a question. Hold on, hang on. Yeah, we do have a question. I don't know if you can see that question. We'll take that question. So is there a possibility, thanks, Ivani, is there a possibility of bringing one's complete self into a virtual meeting, especially since virtual meetings are timed and involves a lot of people?
Well, that's a
200% into a virtual meeting.
that's a very good question. I mean, I think the question is, do you need to bring your one complete self to virtual meetings for the purpose of the agenda of the meeting? I think, maybe you should only bring to the meeting what's required for the productivity of the meeting. You don't have to bring your whole self every time, and maybe keep your whole self for those kind of smaller, more intimate one-to-one conversation, which are more about building relationship than answering a meeting agenda. I mean, that might sound a bit rough from a business perspective, but I don't expect my teams to bring their whole self 100% of the time, especially to big meetings. And I hate big meetings because most of the time you're wasting people's time. I'd rather
Yeah,
have small collaboration where needed and ad hoc than a whole big meeting. Really, what's the purpose of it apart from maybe giving out information?
yeah. So I think I
So
like that. There is always a purpose of a certain meeting, and there's an intent of a certain meeting. I think the trouble is when you're trying to replicate things which can only be done offline, and we take them online. Like, for example, an ideation meeting. I mean, can you really realistically do an ideation meeting virtually with people sitting in 200 different locations, and some people not putting on the camera? It's probably not as effective as you will do it in the office. So I think purpose, the meeting purpose, is what we need to focus on, I guess.
I mean, I think you can do successful ideation meetings remotely, but they take a lot of effort and they take a lot of prep. You need to develop your tools ahead of time and think how you're going to manage it. And then for the participants in the meeting, there are a lot more onerous than being face to face. It's very draining to be
Yeah.
ideating in a meeting. So it's not impossible, but it's not as efficient.
Right. Indeed. I think it's about the five senses, right, that we always like to tune on to. Well, thanks, Colin. Very interesting point. I wish I could go on, and I'll catch you offline after this. But we promise to keep this discussion short. People's attention spans are shorter today online. And thanks everyone for joining us today. At AWI we keep on having this regularly. And if you want to be a part of these meetings, please do write into me, and we'll send you a list of events which are coming up. We have to say bye now. Thanks a lot, Colombine, and have a
Thank
good
you,
rest of
everyone.
the day. Thanks, everyone. Yeah. Bye. Bye for now.